You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. Lots to get to today, Andy. First, want to let people know that NBA Draft GOAT Chad Ford, Locked On NBA Draft host Rafael Barlow, and Locked On NBA host John Corrales will be live this year covering the NBA Draft. It's the Locked On NBA Draft 2021, brought to you by Built Bar. Get local expert analysis on each pick and follow Locked On NBA on YouTube today to watch our live coverage on July 29th at 7 p.m. As long as 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, where we are, Andy, and as long as we're encouraging people, subscribe to us on YouTube as well. Locked On Lakers on YouTube. Do that.
Yeah, you should do both, but I'm not going to tell you how to prioritize it. You can just infer whatever you want from my tone, but you should definitely do both.
Right. You can do one now. The other one you have to wait until the 29th.
Yes.
So do the one you can do now.
Yeah. Pace yourself properly.
We've been previewing and giving some scouting reports on a lot of the guys that have been connected to the Lakers in mock drafts as the draft comes around again on the 29th. And we had a really interesting interview today on Chris Duarte, the prospect from Oregon, who is 742 years old in basketball years. He's an actual college senior, Andy.
I know.
A real live one of those.
I didn't know you were still allowed to do that.
I didn't either. So we have our scouting report of him that we'll bring to you next. But I want to start with the mailbag. We opened up the Locked On Lakers mailbag. The people can send us questions at Cam Brothers on Twitter. You can do it KamenetskyBrothers@gmail.com on email, or by leaving a 5-star review on the iTunes page. Just leave a question there, and we 100% will answer it for you if it comes with that 5-star review. And this was, I thought, a really interesting one because it sort of frames the entire offseason. From Will Powell 4, do Dennis Schröder, Montrezl Harrell, and Kyle Kuzma make it through the offseason and start next season with the Lakers?
It's an interesting question in part because I feel like if the Lakers have entire control over the situation and they're full druthers, the answer could be no.
No, the answer is not only no, the answer is absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, the Lakers obviously want to try to upgrade as much as possible, and Kyle Kuzma would almost unquestionably be a part of any type of deal like that, if for no other reason than the salary implications. I am starting to get a sense when you hear of these reports about Dennis Schröder being a sign and trade possibility, that's not entirely about what they could fetch in return for Schröder. It's more about the ability to get off Schröder if possible and not be put in the situation where they have to bring him back, but they're not really pleased at the prospect. And Harrell, if he is back, that's entirely within his choice, but it's already pretty clear that he's not thrilled with his situation. And if he ends up opting in, unless it's opting in to get traded, and that's something the Lakers worked out, it's largely because he recognizes he's got no better option economically, but boy, is he pissed at the prospect.
Well, yeah, what I think is great about this question, and it actually relates, the answers to these questions have a lot to do with who the Lakers end up drafting on the 29th. Is it somebody that you need to be able to play to fill a hole that has been left by somebody that they just traded, that, left via free agency, whatever it might be? Kuz is actually the guy in there that I'm sure they're fine having back. Like, is the least problematic potentially to welcome back. You know exactly how much he's going to make. He's right at that $13 million figure, which, given how he played last year, is a perfectly comfortable place for him to be. He played well defensively. He's grown into a more versatile player. The shooting got better. We'd all love it if Kuz was able to consistently produce 15 to 18 a night. Doesn't seem like it's going to happen, but it's okay.
If you ask him, a little more consistency, his role being a little more defined.
No, I get it. But he's the one who
talk to the guy in charge, Brian.
Trez, like you say, could be back, but probably doesn't want to be.
Nope.
And Schröder, I think they would want to come back, but are really nervous about the amount of money that it would cost. I think the answer to this question is no, but I cannot tell you which of those three guys is least likely to do it. I mean, ironically, I think to some degree, like Trez might be the one who is at least most likely to re-up with the Lakers. Like, I think there's a good chance he picks up that player option. And then maybe it's with the understanding the Lakers trade him, or maybe not. But at the very least, for starters, that's the thing on this list that I'm probably most confident about, is that Trez picks up that option.
Yeah, I would say if I had to put money on the guy least likely to be back, it's Kuzma, only because the Lakers themselves have the most control over what happens with Kuzma.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
You know, and like you said, his contract is reasonable, and we know they're going to be looking to make moves. And, you know, with Schröder, he's either going to be back or there's a sign and trade possibility, but sign and trades are difficult to do. And the Lakers,
keeping in mind too, as we talked about early in the week, just to not to interrupt, but like it's more of a sign and trade where he goes out rather than the Lakers sign and trade.
Maybe, but either way, they're complicated. And what the Lakers don't want to have happen, unless the money we're talking about is just absolutely outrageous to keep him, they don't want to lose Schröder for nothing. And, you know, that prospect could end up what keeps him there. And like we talked about, Trez has the most immediate control about what happens with his future. So if I had to put money on one of them not being back or the least likely to be back, it would be Kuzma. That being said, it would not shock me at all if all three of them are back.
No. And it wouldn't shock me if all three were gone. And it wouldn't shock me if all three were back.
It would be more shocking if all three are gone than all three are back. I'll tell you that much right now.
Only because of the amount of moves that were required, but it would mean that they probably, Trez opts in and has been traded somewhere else. Kuz is part of a deal. Like it just means
it's much harder to make
a trade.
It is way harder to make all three disappear than it is to keep all three in the fold. It is way more complicated.
Schröder's easy to bring back. All you got to do is offer a big number and he'll come back. So yeah, in that regard. So great question, Will. Thank you very much for sending that in. With Game 6 on the horizon, Andy, this is an interesting question from Aniket Mohan 24. And apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. Who would you take in the last 5 minutes, Giannis or AD?
It's a bit of a difficult question to know without having an idea of who the teammates are. Right. But I'm going to treat this as both of them are the number one options of their team. Like they're the focal point of the respective offenses. With that in mind, to me, the answer is Giannis, because you need a guy that you can truly run an offense through in any position on the floor. And, you know, I'm treating this as if there is a notable gap between whoever is the number two guy and Giannis or AD, again, just for the sake of framing this question before you start getting into like fictitious roster construction.
Right. I mean, it's basically like, you know, which guy, I mean, I think at its core, this is one of those like, which guy do you just think has a more potentially dominant game and this and that, whatever. And I when I saw this, I was like, the answer is obviously Giannis, especially with given what we've seen in the finals. You know, his ability to sort of play downhill and the aggressiveness. Like you say, you can put the ball in his hands
anywhere
without, right, and he can find the other guys. AD, who is a remarkably versatile big, still has to have the ball given to him. He doesn't bring the ball up the floor in that way.
No, he doesn't run full sets the way Giannis does.
The wild card here thing, and I think this is maybe part of what Aniket is getting at, is free throws.
Yeah.
The last 5 minutes of a game. Now, Davis was down last year with his free throw percentage, but overall, over the course of his career, has been an excellent free throw shooter. And what we've seen, though, the kryptonite for Giannis, if he has it, is you can foul him at the end of games. Yeah. And he is not a great free throw shooter. And so the difference between the last 5 minutes of a game, you put the ball in Giannis's hands and he's always getting fouled and you're only getting 30, 40, 50, low, whatever at the free throw line versus AD, who you can't do that to, I think is a sneaky factor to put in there. I think overall Giannis is the answer to that question, but that's where like the specific skill sets, in this case, the inability to be a good free throw shooter makes a difference.
Yeah, it's interesting.
If AD is shooting 70%, 60, whatever, like he did this year, the answer is Giannis by a fair margin.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, with Giannis because his free throw issues have become so magnified in the playoffs because this year in particular, they've been a lot worse and last year as well.
Mm-hmm.
But on the whole, Giannis has not been a god-awful free throw shooter.
No.
Like the last few years, he's been in the 60s or the 70s, which would be perfectly acceptable. On his career, he's almost 72%. It's just been specifically the last 2 years in the playoffs where he's really become a problem. That said, though, he's basically a coin flip. And if you're a coin flip guy who can do everything else that Giannis can do, again, over the course of the last 5 minutes and everything you would need from a number one guy, I would still take Giannis. But you're correct. That is what ultimately makes you think about it.
In my head, I'm rewinding the tape in my head. I think I might have used like by a mile or something. Like it is not like, or in a walk or whatever I said. It's not like Giannis is light years, but I would take Giannis in this situation over AD with the caveat that I would happily take both. All right, let's get to Chris Duarte, our interview with Adam Chimeo to preview and give a scouting report of Chris Duarte, one of the more interesting prospects of the NBA draft coming up on the 29th. We'll do that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by rockauto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes, models out there, it is impossible to stock all the parts you need in a traditional chain storefront. And why would you spend 30%, 50%, 100% more for the exact same auto parts at a chain store or a new car dealership anyway, dummy? Where you can get it for far less at rockauto.com. Rock Auto always offers the lowest prices possible rather than changing the prices based on the market like the airlines do. Don't get me started on the airlines. They are out of control. People act like savages on a plane anyway, so why give them your hard-earned money? RockAuto.com, it's a family business serving auto part customers online for 20 years. Whether it's for a classic or a daily driver, get everything you need in a few easy clicks delivered directly to your door. Go to RockAuto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or your truck, right locked on in their How Did You Hear Us About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com.
All right, joining us right now, Andy, in our last installment of the NBA draft previews, we discussed, I think, one of the youngest guys in the draft. Now we are going to shift gears and discuss the guy who might be like the oldest. I'm not sure, but he's on the older side of it. He is
75 years old.
He is.
He's like Dennis Quaid in The Rookie, but older. It's a hell of a story. We're very excited. It's very inspirational.
Chris Duarte has become one of the more intriguing prospects in the 2021 draft, primarily because of his shooting and the general consensus that he could be a guy who can step in and help a rotation right away. And to talk about that, we are joined by Adam Chimeo. He is the managing editor at Addicted to Quack. That's the Oregon site over at SB Nation. Also hosts the Quack 12 podcast. Adam, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Of course, I'm stoked to talk about this ancient player we got here.
He's a rare thing. Like I thought, an endangered species, something called a college senior. How, in all seriousness though, like it is so rare now to see guys who stay, in school and are done as a college senior 4 years. What has his path kind of been to get him to this point now where he's projected to be an NBA, first rounder?
Well, his path has been an interesting one because, he took the JUCO route to Oregon. So his first 2 seasons, I do believe, he played for Northwest Florida State College. He was born in Puerto Plata, the Dominican Republic. And then I believe he did boarding school his first 2 seasons in high school at the Redemption Christian Academy in Troy, New York. So he's taken quite the path to get to Oregon. Eventually, he did land on this team, and he had
Redemption Christian Academy sounds like where you send the really bad kids.
I know,
it makes him sound much more troubled than I think he actually is.
I agree. I don't know what he was redeeming himself of, but he must have gotten that demon exercise because
it's pretty weighty.
By his junior year, he was doing. He really made a quick impression on this team, which was really spearheaded by Peyton Pritchard, another ancient player. Yeah, and that was really ramping up. He got injured for the last 3 games, I think, but they were saving him for the tournament, which inevitably, was canceled. And then this last season, he's really taken the control over the whole team, really filled in for that Pritchard spot, which is a big hole to leave because he really was having a hell of a senior season. And Duarte matched up with that and took him to a very strange, very Pac-12 filled NCAA tournament run.
His field goal percentages went up 12 points from 41 to 53 from the field junior year to senior year. And then his 3-point percentage jumped about 10 points from 33 to around 42, basically the same volume. From what you saw, what accounted for those improvements, given that, he's not an inexperienced young player?
Well, and maybe this will bode well for his future pro career. But it seemed like asking more responsibility of him was just exactly what the man needed.
When you look at him though, in the type of role that he plays, sort of piggybacking on what you just said there, do you think he was main scoring component, took a lot of shots, all that kind of stuff, played a huge role in Oregon's offense this year, is expected to be much more of a polished role player? I think certainly early in his NBA career. Do you think it's going to be a tough adjustment for him? Where do you think he fits into a team next year?
I think next year, I think it would be maybe a little bit too bold to be like, I think he can crack a starting roster, most of these starting rosters. But I think as far as a role player, I think he is someone that you can plug and play right now. I mean, he's shot well from 3-point. Like as you said, he took a huge jump there. I believe he ended that season like 42.4% on 5.5.
On the nose.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, on 5.5 attempts per game. Obviously, I got notes. But not only that, but I think it's just the idea, and especially, I mean, you guys hit me up. The idea of him playing with the kind of talent that the Lakers has, that really just sparked me up, because the idea of him, playing with the ball, but with almost the mentality of off the ball, like making plays for his all the playmakers on that team, and then not only that, but getting himself in a position when he doesn't have the ball to the place where he needs to be, and taking the shot if it is open for him. Like, he's not afraid. He was the man who was leading like so many of these comebacks that we had this last 2 seasons, hitting the like clutch shots to win it in all these close games against elite talent in the Pac-12 this last season. I mean, yeah, I think he's definitely someone who on the right roster can really, like, this next season be someone that fans are loving.
Getting a little bit more specific with him as a scorer, what do you consider his strengths as a scorer, the things that he does well, and then what are some of the areas where he's either weaker or you think could improve, but it's just not quite there yet?
Well, he's definitely just one of those guys where it's just like the footwork and the fundamentals are just so like solidly there. That is such a strength of his. A weakness will always be that he isn't quite that like elite athleticism, that would have made it that he, I guess got not only like picked up by a power program quicker and drafted sooner. He doesn't quite possess that amount of talent. However, the fundamentals are there. His ability to make plays is his absolute strength, is that he is a playmaker. And I think even in the NBA, he'll be able to make his own shot, but probably more importantly, make shots for others.
That's what I was going to actually ask. When you said a playmaker, because I haven't seen as much described in terms of him setting up other people. It's just more about him being able to create his own shot or him being able to score. Is he actually capable of setting up teammates, stuff like that?
I think so, especially with this last season, which was really like it was LJ Figueroa, Eugene Omoruyi, and Chris Duarte were really the three-headed monster, and they were constantly. It was just the attack from those three and constantly helping each other out with the unselfish play between those three is how Oregon got its success this last season, and so. I believe he's the kind of player that would easily be willing to take a role where, first looking to set someone up. And I think his ability to do both is really what has got people very excited for him.
When you look at the sort of the package here defensively, you kind of alluded to it with the quickness. Is he good enough to be able to stay on the floor? Again, you look at a team like the Lakers, you have to defend at a certain threshold, or Frank Vogel will not put you on the floor. Is he good enough on that end of the floor to be able to play?
I do think he's good enough. Especially because Dana Altman, the way his teams are constructed they're very often known for their offense, but it's all centered around that defense and just like suffocating the other team, getting the turnovers and such. So I think, and it's one of the reasons why they do so much better, like consistently, Dana Altman's teams do so much better later in the season is because the players are really learning it. And it takes that amount of time, like just something you can set your watch on. And so I think him being in the program for the last 2 seasons, I think he's a smart guy. And I think that will make up enough of his for his physical weaknesses that I think he will be able to stay on the court with his defense. I think mainly he'll be there for his offense, but I don't think his defense will get him benched.
Last thing for you, Adam, like he's a guy who kind of bounces around the draft boards, the mock drafts. Is he the type of guy that just would shine and do better on a good team, a playoff caliber team like the Lakers, a team that has aspirations, rather than, going to some lousy lottery team? Does he have more value to good teams?
I couldn't agree with that more. Like this for him, it's exactly his strengths right now, that if he gets in there with a system that's already in place, he's really going to dedicate himself, learn that system. He's shown that he can. And I think it just matches perfectly with his ceiling and his floor, that he would just be the perfect accent to a team. It would just, I really do believe that, as opposed to some, coming up team or something like that.
Awesome. That makes a ton of sense. And fits a kind of a profile. And the Lakers have a really interesting decision to make. So we'll see what they do, or if the guy's even available when they get there at 22. Adam Chimeo, he is the managing editor at Addicted to Quack. As you can tell, if you're watching on YouTube, that is Oregon. He's the host of the Quack 12 podcast. Thanks so much, man, for coming on. This is great. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, you guys. Yeah. The last, I'd say, LA brothers that I've really had to deal with are the Mobley brothers. So it was a nicer interaction here.
Well, it was more pleasant.
Thanks a lot.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, the fastest, easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Baseball season's in full swing. You can track all the action at BetOnline. This week, as always, tons of sports action on the go. Get all the latest news, odds, info for all your sporting needs, including MLB, NBA, UFC, MMA. Before the next pitch, head over to BetOnline on your laptop, your mobile device. Check out all the great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, contest information. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore. This is your chance to get into the game as your teams are neck deep in the playoffs. Head to the website, use your mobile device, sign up today, receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit using the promo code LOCKEDON. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
All right. Thanks again to Adam Chimeo for joining us. I think it's really interesting to me, Andy, that we went from Jaden Springer, basically one of the youngest prospects in this draft, to Chris Duarte, one of the oldest prospects in this draft. Because it speaks in Springer. There are people, when we talk to Eric Kane from Locked On Vols, he thinks Springer can play next year.
Yeah.
But
he said he's actually a mature kid for his age. And
no question.
Talen Horton-Tucker was mature, and they drafted him extremely young.
But that said, the consensus, and I don't, neither one of us claim to be the, draft nicks, and we've seen these guys and scouts breaking down. I'm aggregating what I'm reading.
Yeah.
The consensus seems to be that Duarte is among the more NBA ready players that you can find in this draft. And John Hollinger, a couple other people I've noticed said, like, if he were a free agent, people would sign him to be, a 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th guy in a rotation at like a $7 or $8, $9 million deal or something.
He's already like a mid-level exception guy.
Kind of, right. That's
interesting.
And I think that is fascinating because people underestimate how important that is. And if you look at the Lakers this year, not having consistency 3 through 7, 4 through 8, depending on who was hurt at a given time, was a massive problem, for the Lakers over the course of the season. And, again, it's exacerbated by injuries. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on. But stability in that 4 through 7 spot for a contending team is so important. Look at Pat Connaughton and like how valuable he's become over the course of the finals, or guys like Jay Crowder or Cam Johnson over the course of the playoffs has had, like, those guys are really important in the playoffs for good teams if they want to go deep.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes those role guys are the difference between getting to the finals, winning a championship or not. And today on the road to the finals, our NBA playoffs coverage brought to you by Michelob Ultra. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. And at 2.6 carbs, 95 calories, we can all enjoy the games a little more this season. This is what I do, Brian.
With that mailbag segment beginning, we had pre-recorded something for the I wasn't sure when you were going to do it, Andy, but bam, there you go.
No, look, doing it in the first segment, I mean, that's for the faint of heart. I'm not doing it then.
No.
Where's the challenge in that?
No, there isn't. The problem is, obviously, if Duarte doesn't hit the high floor, if it turns out like he's considered a lower ceiling, higher floor guy, if the floor is actually lower, then you've got the worst of all worlds here. You get somebody who isn't really capable of playing and contributing and all that, and isn't going to get better. So whereas like Springer, Trey Mann, some of these other guys that we're going to profile before the draft, okay, they're not ready year 1, but you can look at year 2, year 3, and it's not ideal. It's not maybe what the Lakers need, or maybe you can plan around that with free agency if you think you have a pretty good idea. To go back to that mailbag question from the beginning of the show, if you have a pretty good idea, you're the Lakers, of what the answer to that question about who of these guys is going to be back, or what can you do with them? And these conversations are happening. Just because they're not being publicized in the playoffs doesn't mean they're not happening. If you have a good answer, it's like maybe you can take a guy that needs a little bit more time. But man, it on the outside looking in, a guy who can come in and play right away and was a 43% 3-point shooter in college seems like a nice fit.
I feel pretty strongly that unless you're talking about a guy whose upside at 22 is so high, like so unexpectedly high, because typically those guys are gone by then, unless you're talking about just an insane project, like somebody that you're drafting because he's 3 years away from being 3 years away, whatever that line was.
Bruno Caboclo?
Yes, exactly. Like, for this particular team and what they're trying to do and the mode they're in right now, and this last season was a reminder that as great as LeBron is, he ain't getting any younger. And your opportunities with him, they're not expanding as much as LeBron recently said. He might play until he's in his 40s or whatever. You got to treat this with urgency. And I don't think that they can use a roster spot on somebody that the likelihood of putting on the floor is pretty low. They need somebody who can be a credible 9th through 11th man. And that sounds like, based off what Adam told us and based off what both of us have been reading, that Chris Duarte could be that guy.
Absolutely.
And, one of the things that's interesting about him, and I would love to learn more about him, especially if the Lakers end up taking him, the route that he's had to the NBA, from the Dominican Republic to this high school in New York, and his family moved him specifically for basketball, to a JUCO, to Oregon, to entering the draft late. It's an unusual path, but you also wonder if it's one that hardens a guy in a good way. Like you really start recognizing the urgency of opportunity,
sure,
and just how much better you have to be, how little time you have to waste anything in front of you. Like the JUCO that he went to, Brian, I had no idea that's a school. I'd never heard of that.
No, that I hadn't either. And
like Northern Western
like he was just
Florida
attaching
State
words together.
Yeah, I mean, that was like a
what
word
are the 17 words that
soups.
appear in a column? The only thing I didn't hear in there was A and T.
Yeah, that was a word soup, a word salad of colleges. I'm like, that's
You're right, and I think there is a tendency, and I'm not saying that this is what's happening here, and I'm not like all in on Chris Duarte. I don't know these people from Adam. It is a reminder, though, that we do sometimes overstate the ceiling, overstate the upside, and kind of just be like, what, that guy can play. Like, he's just a good basketball. Larry Nance is just a good basketball player.
That's one of the things that I think, the Lakers, for the success that they've had drafting late in the first round or sometimes in the second, with the exception of a guy like Talen Horton-Tucker, who they knowingly took at a very young age,
right?
That he'd have to be polished. Although I'm guessing that he's come along quicker than they expected.
Along quicker, but I think they knew this. Talen Horton-Tucker was the body equivalent of the age bias, where you look at it and say, like, people physically looked at THT and said that's not going to work, whereas the Lakers said, yeah, but he can play and he can grow into a better body and all that stuff. And he's got arms that are 17 miles long.
But by and large, I think the reason the Lakers have managed to draft really well in the late in the first round is guys like Kuz, Larry Nance Jr., Josh Hart. These are guys that were very easy to tell who they were in the NBA, what type of players they are. To their credit, I think all of them have gotten better since the point the Lakers drafted them. But they were 3 or 4 years in college. They were fairly well-developed guys, and all of them, I think, if they had been drafted, but the Lakers were one of those teams drafting late in the first that was nowhere near competing in the playoffs. But if they had been taken by a typical team drafting, in the 20s, 30s, that had playoff aspirations, I think all of those guys could have had a role on a playoff team as a rookie. And I think the Lakers are good at identifying that.
And again, lower ceiling, but higher floor, and floor matters. Floor is very important. Floor is very important for teams like the Lakers. No question about it. All right, so we're going to keep going with this Jared Butler, who's kind of in this vein, good shooter, slightly older player, not as old as Duarte, but older compared to some of the other guys in the draft. So we'll be talking about him next and some other guys through the pipeline, getting everybody ready for the draft. Again, reminder, subscribe to Locked On Lakers on YouTube and never miss a show, never miss some of the exclusive content that we'll have going up there, especially as we roll into free agency and the draft. And thanks, everybody. Thanks again to Adam Chimeo, and we'll see everybody tomorrow.